Welcome to UpLift Women's Wellness. I'm Bethany Busch, founder of Head to Toe Strength.
And I'm Auria Zahed, a licensed marriage and family therapist. We're here to empower and inspire women to thrive through holistic wellness.
Each week, we'll dive into topics like fitness, mental health, and personal growth.
And share real conversations and actionable insights to help you live your strongest, healthiest life.
Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started.
The reason why I wanted to do a history of feminism podcast was because one day I was like, how come in Westerns there's always saloon girls? And she explained, like, that's because women didn't have any other job opportunities and they couldn't own anything. So if you didn't have a husband and you didn't have a dad, you were probably working at a saloon because that was the only, and like by working at a saloon, it was like you're a prostitute, right? But in movies, I thought it was just men being like, let's put beautiful women around, you know. But she taught me what it really was. But that moment, this was years ago, but in that moment, I was like, wow, I really don't know anything. So that is why it's important to talk to history teachers.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Yeah. So we got Isabelle, who is definitely a girl's girl and willing to share her knowledge.
I'm a history teacher as well as a psychology teacher, and I mostly teach U.S. history, and I absolutely have a soft spot for women's history, and regardless of what unit and time I'm paying attention to, I always make sure to include women's voices and remind people of, like, while we tend to think of history as a pretty male-dominated space, what that actually looks like for the women of the time.
Yes. So helpful. Yeah. And I always say, you know, in media, we get to hear men's voices because they're the ones like really running the show because they're in the positions of power to do so. Mm-hmm. So I really like that you include women's voices because we are 50% of the population. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the time periods are exactly why I wanted a history teacher to go over this with us. Because I took some women's studies classes, Isabelle, and they were very present because that's how much there is to learn. It is very now or in the last 10 years or so, because I was in college in the early 2000s. And some of the things haven't changed, by the way, which we still have a lot of work to do. But Isabelle, I was hoping before we really go into history, if you could review your reasons why you wanted to study feminism and what feminism means to you.
Yeah, so I love talking about feminism because it seems so controversial, yet at its heart, it's really not. And so I'm going to was hoping to have this conversation a little bit with my own personal stories, but also kind of talk to you guys about how I teach feminism in my class. So to answer this question, I like to really have people think for themselves first of, like, what do you think feminism means? And do you call yourself a feminist? Why or why not? And every time I pose this question and my students answer it, I get such like a wide variety of answers. And I'll have students tell me about, like, well, when they open up TikTok, they see like women with dyed hair and talking about like that feminism is about ending male dominated spaces, or, you know, kind of these more extreme versions of the definition. And then I tell them, like, the most basic definition of feminism truly is the theory of political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, aka equality for men and women. And I think the reason why feminism is so important for me is because it's something that's supposed to uplift all people. It's supposed to uplift men. It's supposed to uplift women. It's supposed to uplift our trans communities, our non-binary communities. It's supposed to uplift everyone in society. And, you know, the statistics are a little bit different depending on what sites you look at, but about 80% of Americans agree in the fact that men and women should have equal rights, which, like, to be fair, 80% still seems shockingly low, if I'm being quite honest. Like, I'm like, what the heck, 80%? But then once you understand that definition of what feminism means, it's shocking that only 25% of Americans call themselves feminists. And women are more likely to call themselves feminists than men, and millennials, out of any generation, even more than Gen Z, are actually having, like, more people calling themselves feminists. But I guess, like, the reason why I was so interested was why is it that people overall agree with gender equality, but, like, the word feminism has become so taboo? And that's why I really like the history of feminism, is to kind of figure out, like, where does that, you know, animosity, that fear, where is that coming from?
Wow. Okay. Well, what you said gave me chills. And I definitely see feminism as equality. And that's why I get very frustrated when it's bad-mouthed. My personal opinion of why it's negative is, again, the males in power feel that by giving power, they are losing power. And that's not at all what's happening. It is definitely equality.
Mm-hmm.
And right? Yeah. And we always talk about how men have so many women in their lives that it's very strange that they're scared of feminism.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, like, we have to find that balance between playing within the system and playing in the bounds of outside of the system. And sometimes that means that, like, women badmouth feminism themselves because they realize they might get more clout if they badmouth it, or they might be more accepted in society if they, like, push it away. While I understand working within the bounds of our society and I see a place for it, I also think ultimately bad-mouthing feminism does way more harm than good for women. And that's why I'm very adamant about, like, not making it a controversial topic in my class and allowing kids to share those opinions of, like, well, I saw on the internet somebody saying that if you're a feminist, it means you never shave your armpits, or you burn your bras, or you will never get married, or, you know, like, those type of things. Because yeah, like, tell me all the crazy wacko things you've heard so I can tell you where those actually come from and what the reality actually is, and why it might benefit our society to badmouth feminism, and why those people in power want you to think bra-burning feminist instead of gender equality feminist. That's, to me, why it's such a powerful topic, and one that I really like to bring the controversy out. Like, say the crazy things, and then let's challenge them.
Yeah, amazing. That is so cool. I love that you're having conversations with teens about this. Yeah, that is perfect timing because they're developing their brains. You know, frontal lobe stuff is going to come in the next few years, and they're learning equality immediately. In the last podcast Bethany and I recorded, I don't know when that one's actually going to post, but I talked about how I really like when little boys and little girls get to play with each other, because boys learn that women are equal very quickly. And so I feel like you're doing something similar in the classrooms where you're getting them at their teen age of, like, there's equality in this classroom. There can be equality in the world.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We all have our own, like, unique voices to bring to the conversation. All strengths that we can bring. So I love the topic. Like, every year, every time it comes around, I wear my Rosie the Riveter headband. I'm like, let's go. I could spend all year talking about it, but it's definitely my favorite part of the school year.
Amazing. Well, good. We definitely picked the right person to talk to.
I hope so.
Yes. Well, I have, like, history questions for you, Isabelle. So Like I was saying, I really don't know much about the past other than there was like political and economic equality, right? So what can you recall are some general rules that were basically against women having the rights that they have now? And any like actual years that those change that are meaningful?
When people think about like the women's rights movement, there's actually historically 4 separate windows in American history. And historians like to call those waves. So depending on what source you're reading, it's either seen as like 3 or 4 waves, and we're kind of in the 4th wave, if that makes sense. But sometimes people kind of muddle the 3rd and 4th wave together. So just kind of keep that in mind. But the first wave is like the classic suffrage movement. And suffrage just means the right to vote. And so for women's rights in the United States, this is really happening in like the 1800s. And arguably, the suffrage movement, or that first wave, is one of the most united waves because it really had one main goal, which was the right to vote. And when I say united, I don't mean united like kumbaya, like all people are together. It's the 1800s. It was still very white. It was still very middle class. And that will be a criticism of all of the waves. And so I want to definitely keep that in mind as we have these conversations, that like the women's rights movement is one that preaches inclusivity but doesn't always practice it. So that first wave had one goal in mind, and that was the right to vote. And again, not to get like too much in the weeds, but the history teacher in me like has to geek out just slightly. Yes. But there are like 3 major amendments that happened in our country that are like, to me, ones that everyone needs to know, which is like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment ended slavery in our country. The 14th Amendment, everyone remember it, put it on your arm. It's very valuable. And it is the fact that everyone should be treated equally under the law. In other words, it kind of gives everybody citizenship. And the 15th Amendment actually gave those newly freed slaves the right to vote. And this is where we start to see kind of the women's rights movement take place. Because when the 15th Amendment is created, the word men is not included. So many of these like suffragettes are like, oh, you did it. Like, we can use it. We can finally vote. Like, you didn't say men, like we can do it. And so the 15th Amendment passes, and these extremely powerful suffragettes are like, let's go vote. And they immediately try and vote and are immediately turned away or even arrested. And it becomes known that 15th Amendment, therefore, then gets interpreted that it's only for men. And this kind of like pushes that suffrage movement even more to be like, look, even now, we keep interpreting citizen as men only. And that obviously is like extremely upsetting to your point earlier of like 50% of the population is women. So not having 50% of the voices in a representative democracy seems very upsetting. And we have that suffragette movement coming along because of it. But after many years of fighting, and ultimately after World War I, the United States with President Woodrow Wilson is kind of like forced into it. And I say forced because like the rest of the world is already allowing women to vote, and women participated so patriotically and so importantly in the First World War that it was kind of like we couldn't make the claim anymore that women weren't participating politically, because Exhibit A, World War I, women are participating and helping the war effort. So Woodrow Wilson kind of gives women the right to vote as this like nod to, okay, yeah, maybe you did do what you said you were going to do. And so the 19th Amendment passes and officially gives women the right to vote. And that's kind of seen as the end of that first wave, because the main goal, which is women's voting rights, is officially granted for women. But yeah, so that's the first big one.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah. So it definitely sounded familiar. Yeah. But that was really helpful to know exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So we basically jumped by 100 years because we went from the 1800s to World War I.
Yeah.
Why was it? Is it the Puritanism? Is it the coming over from Europe? Like, what made us still be non-participatory people?
Yeah.
Humans. What made us non-participatory humans in this time?
So it takes about 50 years. So the 15th Amendment passes in, I believe it's about like 1870. And then the 19th Amendment passes in 1919 and is ratified in 1920. And a big part of that is that many people after the Civil War told suffragettes to sit down and wait their turn. Because after the Civil War, there's like so much chaos happening in our country, and many African Americans are like trying to obviously rightfully fight for their rights. And there's a little bit of this feeling that like women, it's just not your time. And obviously like abolitionists and the women's rights movement were very close and hand in hand in many times. And it should never be seen as like this or that. But that's how many like white male politicians put it. Whereas like, could you imagine a world where we give African Americans rights and women rights at the same time? Like, well, that would mess everything up in our country. And so after the Civil War is this period called Reconstruction. And so a lot of these like rights and these efforts to change are really focused in on that side. And that isn't to say the suffrage movement isn't alive and well. It isn't to say that African Americans are telling women to like quiet down. Nothing like that at all. But it's just almost like our country, regardless of if it's women or minorities, LGBTQ, there's this like weird societal feeling that happens where it's like, oh, it's not your time. Even in more modern history, like when the Vietnam War is happening is the same time that the African-American civil rights movement is happening. And people like shamed Martin Luther King Jr. They're like, how dare you talk about African-American rights when we're trying to fight a war in Vietnam? And so there's almost this weird shift that happens in our society that's like, it's one thing at a time. And unfortunately that happens during this time period as well. And so the one thing at a time that happens is a lot to do with Reconstruction. But that said, a little bit of a caveat, obviously the United States was still growing in the 1800s. And many Western states, like Wyoming, for example, is the first state that actually grants women the right to vote. And so many people saw it as like a states' rights issue. So people were kind of like, look, if you want your state to allow women to vote, that's cool. And you can do that. Obviously, women wanted to be able to vote for president. So they didn't always love that and ultimately push against it. But many Western states actually allow women the right to vote. And many Western suffragists fight for that. So, and I guess I kind of want to challenge my own use of that word allow, because that makes it seem like it's just these men in power that are like, you're welcome, right? And I don't mean it like that. I just mean it more like these women and these advocates are fighting and fighting and fighting until the system kind of allows it to happen. So yes, ultimately it takes a really long time, but there are some cracks that start to show specifically in the West.
Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you. So that was wave one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wave two?
Yeah, so wave two is the one that everyone thinks about. Wave two is the like stereotypical, I'm burning my bra, even though that never happened. And I'm, refusing to shave my armpits, and we're all lesbians now, and down with the man. Like, that's the one everyone's thinking about. Okay.
Okay.
And arguably, it's my favorite one. And I love the radicalness of it, even though, again, in more modern concepts, it's not that radical. But yeah, so the second wave happens right around in the 1950s. And this one is a lot more complex because now we have a lot more goals. Whereas the first wave was all about voting rights for the most part. This one now encompasses economic rights, social rights, political rights, and ultimately will cause kind of the downfall of the second wave. And that, to me, is not an issue, because people are complicated and people want complicated things, and the second wave really shows that. But essentially, the second wave is what brings that word feminist to the forefront. And I like to think of the word feminist as choice. Choice, choice, choice. And if I could teach every one of your listeners right now what a feminist is, it is somebody that supports a woman's choice. You want to be a stay-at-home mom? I love that for you. You want to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company? I love that for you. You want to do both? I love that for you. And really, it's all about like supporting a woman's choice. And the reason why that's so important, even though it kind of sounds silly, like so simple, is the fact that women in the 50s and 60s, especially white women who start this movement, were not really given a choice. They were told that they had to be wives and mothers. And they were told that their highest purpose and the most fulfilling thing they could ever be in life is a wife and a mother.
Wow, that sounds familiar.
Yeah,
From
I know.
Like, right? I don't know, what, a month ago?
Yeah, what do you mean you don't want children? Aren't you scared you're going to be lonely, right? Like, there's this like feeling that's happening, and it's a really strong push after World War II, where there's this like, oh, the nuclear family's coming together, the baby boomers are happening, and so there's this really big push for conformity, especially because it's the Cold War that's happening, and being different is seen as a sign of communism. So it's like everyone needs to fall in line. And enter a book that's, I don't know if maybe you read it in college. It's like kind of the Bible of the gender studies world. But it's The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. And she publishes this book, and she immediately outlines what she calls is the problem that has no name. And in this problem, she discusses how women are secretly unhappy as wives and mothers, and that there's this unspoken thing that's happening in the world that is that like women don't actually want to do this. And her book becomes a nationwide bestseller. Like everyone is reading this book, it feels like, because women all of a sudden are going, oh my God, the problem that has no name is my problem. And I have felt shame my entire adult life because everyone is telling me I should have purpose, I should have fulfillment, and I should be the happiest version of myself because I'm married with kids. And inside, I'm unhappy. Which is why, also, totally aside, because again, I was a psych major as well, but like Xanax goes super popular for women during this time because they're unhappy, they're anxious, they're depressed, and they have to not talk about it. Because could you imagine being a woman saying, oh my God, I just had these 2 kids, this 1 kid, these 3 kids, and I don't know if I love being a stay-at-home mom? The looks, the ahs, the oohs, the like, you're a terrible woman, you're a terrible mother, you know, all this stuff. And so Betty Friedan writes it down. She screams it. She tells people, and women around the United States are like, holy beep, that's it. That's how I'm feeling. And her book is what people say started the second wave feminist movement. And again, her book is not without criticism, because 2 main things. 1, some women truly like to be stay-at-home wives and mothers. And some women were like kind of offended, right? That she kind of implies like, oh, it's kind of boring to be a stay-at-home wife and mother. And these women that wanted to be stay-at-home wives and mother were like, don't shame me for my choice. Like, I like this. And on the other side, minority women were like, how dare you complain about your middle class upbringing? Like, you get to stay home. I have to work for my family. And so immediately there becomes kind of, not immediately, but soon after the book's publishing, you realize that like who she's talking to are like middle class white women. And many other women are not a part of that and are fighting for different aspects of feminism. And I just always want to bring that up because I think that that's a part of the second wave that is like really overlooked, and ultimately will be one of the reasons why like third and fourth are trying to change that and are trying to like address those issues. But yeah, so that the second wave is much more all encompassing. It is about like changing societal expectations. It's about encouraging women into more political roles, into more leadership roles in their careers. It's also about granting women more independence, even if they do get married, because there were still a lot of laws that restricted women's rights after they were married. And so it's a lot more all-encompassing, if you will, about like the experience of women as a whole.
Yes, definitely. I hear that. But a lot of things you were saying, I feel like still exist. The arguments are still occurring. So then what would the third wave be if that was that long ago?
Yeah, so I like to think of the third and fourth wave as the waves that are trying to fix the issues with the second wave. The second wave is also where we see the birth of that term feminism really like take shape, but it's also where we start to see people shit talk the word feminism. And so how can you fight for feminism if 75% of the population doesn't even agree with the word? And like you start to see people who are like, we shouldn't call it feminist, we should call it humanist, and like all this stuff. And to me, not to be too extreme, but like to me, that's a sexist idea. Like the word femme in the word feminist immediately makes it a woman's word. I'm like, there are so many words to describe the female experience that include words that include male words, like woman, fresh man, female. Like men can have a word that has that femme part in it without it immediately seeming like it doesn't include them.
No, they can't.
And so the third and fourth wave are really just like about fixing those things. So this is where we start to see that term intersectional feminist being used in the third wave feminism, which is like all about understanding that while the feminist movement is fighting for gender equality, women's experiences are different depending on the labels that they find themselves in. Like women with disabilities have a different experience. When minority women have a different experience. Women in the LGBTQ community have different experiences. And so really trying to understand that. But obviously that's hard to do, which is why I like to really stress that the first wave has one goal, and it's voting rights. And it's a lot easier to rally around like one thing. Whereas like the second, third, and fourth wave get a lot messier because there's a lot more differences of opinions. There's a lot more different ideas. There's a lot more different things that people are trying to achieve. You know, you have some women that really want to focus on that like free the nip movement and like having women be topless. And then you have other women that are like, no, we should focus on, you know, domestic violence. And there's just like so many different topics now. And I think that's a good thing, but it also can be very distracting because then people are like, well, what do you want from me? Which lane do you want me to pick? Do you want me to support free the nip or not? Like, do you want me to support sex workers or not? Like, which lane is it, people? Like, tell me which one to pick. Which one's going to be PC? And there's kind of this sense that you like can't win sometimes, which can be difficult. But people are complex, and therefore our movements are going to be complex.
Yes, that definitely makes sense. Yeah. And I feel like that is like just the millions of discussions happening is what I feel is very consistent. But because people are complex and they want different things.
Yeah.
But I can also say with that is there are still vast inequalities between just men and women. Like just that part, I feel like there's some work to do.
Yeah.
But with these waves, Isabelle, can you, with the history side of you, can you tell us some like laws that went into effect that protect women, like differences that did officially happen?
Okay, so 100%. There's a lot of laws that like go into quote unquote protecting women. But before I kind of dig into like two that stand out to me, there's a Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote that always stands out to me when we talk about protecting women. It's something along the lines of like, that pedestal you put me on is actually a cage. And so when laws that are put in place to quote unquote protect women typically do the opposite. They typically like serve to separate men and women in ways that are not necessary. And so, like, for example, in the 1900s, there were laws that exempted women from participating in juries. And the idea behind it was that these laws were to put in place to protect women from hearing evidence that would be like, quote unquote, filthy or sordid. And the idea behind it was like, women are so gentle. They're so fragile that they can't hear the types of crimes that are going on. This would be like so upsetting to their emotions, you know, like that kind of thing. Yeah, we're laughing because it's insane. It's just like, you know how many women love true crime? Okay, like.
Well, I'm just thinking of like, we've literally been like the boss of everything because we carry babies, we nurture babies, we build, like, we are the creature that is designed to continue life, and yet we're told we're too sensitive, and but it also brings up for me where we're constantly being told what we are.
Yeah, 100%.
A man has always felt like he has the right to tell us who we are and what we can and cannot hear, and I just like, I don't fit any of these boxes, dude.
No. And the problem is like, once you start to create, and the thing, and here's like the really hard part, right? Is that people typically don't like jury duty. Unfortunately, again, the history teacher in me is like, civic duty, let's go. Like, I love it. But people don't like it. And so when women were given this like exemptive privilege, and they were seen as a privilege, right? Like, wow, you don't have to do it. A lot of people were like, heck yeah, I don't want to do it. Like, I got things to do. I don't want to be on a jury for 5 days. So like, yeah, oh, I'm so gentle. I don't want to hear it. But the reality is that the reason why they're using this exemption is because they don't want to be on jury duty, not because they're so fragile that they can't listen to it, you know? And so, unfortunately, though, it then was used as like fuel, right? So it's like a vicious circle of like, if all of a sudden these politicians are like, see, oh my gosh, like 80% of women decide not to be on a jury pool if they're given this exemptive privilege. And you're like, well, it's because they don't want to be on a jury, like, not because they can't listen to the facts. And there's a lot of them like that. Like, for example, one of my favorite ones about like protecting women is about working hours, and like limiting the amount of hours you could work was actually first established for women. So, you know, like a 40-hour work week, or like limiting it to like a 50-hour work week, was actually first upheld for women workers. And the idea, again, was because women were so vulnerable and so delicate, and that they like were going to be exploited if they had to work like 100 hours a week. And so, and then ultimately they also would make the argument of like, some of these women are mothers, so they have to go home and they have to like, you know, be with their children and all this stuff. And the reason why I like this example is because men saw these restrictions being put on place and were like, wait, me too. Like, I'm fragile. I actually want to go home. Like, I don't want to work 100 hours a week either. And so what started off as like a protective path for women ended up just being a protective path for workers in general, and to support workers' rights in general, because it turns out nobody wants to work that many hours a week. And it just so happened that like women were or attorneys for women were the first to kind of like crack into that. But again, to your earlier point, it goes back to like people telling women, you're fragile, you can't do it, you won't be able to compete with the men, and so on and so forth. But it kind of continues. There are some other laws that like restricted the types of roles that women can do. And all of that ultimately ends up playing into like gender pay gap as well. So like, for example, in New York, women were unable to work at night as pharmacists because they said that it was like too dangerous for women to work in the middle of the night as pharmacists. But the problem was is that women were able to work in hotels at night. They were willing to work as waitresses at night. And ultimately, what people realized is like, oh, telling women they couldn't work as pharmacists at night was just to ensure that men could continue being pharmacists at night, and was like a way, even though it was said to like protect women, was really just a way to protect men's spaces and protect men's responsibilities. And obviously you're going to be overlooked for a promotion if you can't work certain hours or you were unable to do certain shifts, you know, because like laws are restricting you. So again, to my earlier point, is like any law that says they're like quote unquote protecting women is a slippery slope for women, because it really does kind of then say like, well, look, if you say you're too gentle to do X, Y, and Z, does that mean you're too gentle to participate in other public spaces? And my argument is that no, women are always able to participate in every public space if they so choose. And so that's why these laws kind of stick out to me as like dangerous.
Got it. Okay. So I'm guessing timeline-wise, those were laws that probably men had more control over creating? Or were women also saying these things like from a like legal standpoint?
I mean, it's a little bit of both.
Oh, okay.
Part of it is, yes, it's like a lot of men that are making these laws, but this is my comment from earlier, is that like sometimes women side with the patriarchy because they feel like that's actually going to end up giving them more clout and more power in the long run. And I personally disagree, but we see it even in like modern day policies, like women who align with like anti-women policies, and they're doing so because they feel like they're getting their 15 minutes of fame, or they are from a pretty conservative constituent base, and so they'll vote in support of policies that like actually go against their own benefit, like whether or not they agree for it or not, but like these policies are against women in a lot of. And so unfortunately sometimes women do take that position, and one of the most like famous women in history is Phyllis Schlafly, and she's the woman that like crusades against the Equal Rights Amendment in that second wave feminist movement, even though a vast majority of Americans supported the Equal Rights Amendment, which it's shortened to the ERA, but it would have created a specific amendment in our Constitution that would have outlawed discrimination based on gender and sex. And Phyllis Schlafly was a conservative woman who went state to state and basically made sure that it would not be ratified. So it passed in Congress. Like it was literally, guys, it was right about to become an amendment. And she goes state to state to ensure that the states don't ratify it. And it doesn't pass. And even though, like, when Americans are asked, a vast majority of Americans support it, but she uses like fear-mongering techniques. One of the common ones that she says is like, women are going to be drafted. And I always think of that point because I'm like, you're right, women don't want to be drafted. Totally, I agree. Do you think men want to be drafted? No. So like, before we say women should be drafted, let's talk about drafting. Like, let's talk about what that actually looks like and what that is. And she talks about how like being a woman is a privilege. Again, going back to that like protective mindset. And I think, again, those things put women in a box. They say women should want to be protected. They say women should want to feel vulnerable and should want to have somebody that's like always looking out for them. And some women may want that. Some women may want, quote unquote, a partner that's like a leader, right? I think that's the like cliche term. I'm not saying that that's what you can't have, but I'm also saying that like there should be no societal pressure that forces you into that type of relationship or into that type of mindset. And so unfortunately there have been like women over time that side with the patriarchy and feel that the patriarchy is what is best for them. And we see this unfortunately resurging right now with like the trad wife trend that's happening. And again, if you want to be a traditional wife, that's totally fair. Like, be a stay-at-home wife, get married, have the children, live your dream. I love that for you. I really do. But to like shame other women for wanting jobs or to shame other women for not finding joy in cooking and cleaning is like where I draw the line. And unfortunately, that trad wife trend puts like a huge emphasis on women's roles needing to stay at home and like needing to have a husband that is like your leader and is like guiding your family or whatever it is. And in my experience, it's typically women that are guiding their families. And
right?
these like trad wives, these trad wives are guiding their families as well. They're like the breadwinners of their families in a lot of ways. I'm like, this doesn't make sense, people.
Yeah, I agree. And in this economy, like, what man can have one income? Like, if I were a guy, I wouldn't want the pressure to be able to pay for 3 or 4 people. That sounds horrible.
Which again comes back to like what feminism means to me is like it should ultimately benefit men and women. Like there was a study done that asked college students like what their major is and why, and women overwhelmingly pick majors that they're interested in, whereas men overwhelmingly pick majors that they're going to make money in. And I think that that's sad. I'm like, I was a history and psych major. I wasn't thinking about money at all. That's why I picked them. You know, I was just like, this is interesting. I might make no money. That's cool. And I'll go for it. But I totally, like, I'll never forget. I was in a chem class and there's this guy sitting next to me. We kind of became friendly and I was way better at chem than he was, which is saying something because again, history, psych major. And he like ended up telling me that he was a chem major because he wanted to become a chemical engineer because he wanted to make money. And I was just like, what a different mindset we have. Like this is zero interest in me. I'm never going to do this again. Where he's like, well, I need to support a family. I need to bring home money at some point. And I don't necessarily think that that's a benefit to men as well. So I'm very much on the side of like feminism should be benefiting everyone, not just, you know, that radical view that it's only for women.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. And the major example is very helpful.
When I was in college, and I think I remember it because I shamefully thought it was funny, to be honest. But there was like a meme going around on Instagram, and it was like, ladies, don't stress about finals. Stress about how your husband is doing, or how your future husband is doing with his. And I remember at the time being like, that's so funny, and like not really thinking much of it. And now that meme sticks out to me because I'm like, oh my God, it's so messed up. It's so messed up. Like I was totally kind of falling into prey. I was just like, could not care. It was, you know, I was not thinking about it in that way, shape, or form. And looking back, it's so upsetting. I'm like, I can't even imagine that now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Isabelle, question. So, how do you feel about where women are now? I know you touched on that a little bit. But is there anything that you'd like to see done differently?
I mean, I don't want to be totally a pessimist. Okay. So I really wanted to like think of this question as all the good. You know, women are engaging a lot more politically. Women are outpacing men in college for degrees, and women are absolutely stepping up in a lot of ways when it comes to like those political, social, and economic changes. And at least in my even like in my smaller nuclear world, I do feel like women are much more supportive of choices. I have friends that, you know, actively vocalize hating having to work, and they wish they could be stay-at-home moms financially. And then I have other friends that are moms that wish they could be at work more. And then I have other friends that don't want children and absolutely talk about like just like wanting to be a child-free adult. And I absolutely love all three of those. And I want all three of these situations and all of the other ones to be achievable. So I do feel like there's more of an acceptance than there was in those previous waves. That said, I mean, I think, unfortunately, there's been a little bit of a resurgence of, especially when it comes to, like, men being against women's rights. Like, Gen Z men are kind of scary to me. And maybe that's a strong word, but from what I'm seeing, from, like, what I'm teaching, from what and even when I look at like statistics, like millennials, which I'm a millennial, about 54% of women that are millennials say that they're feminists, and 52% of men that are millennials say that they're feminists. And when you look at it for Gen Z, it's actually 61% of women, which is awesome, but then it drops to 43% for men. And that statistic is alarming to me, because it shows that like something is alienating men, and whether or not I love it, like the reality is men are 50% of the population too. And men are also scary when they are not being heard, and they don't like just protest, they react violently. And the like push of incels, which I don't know if you know what that is. Do you know what an incel is?
Yeah.
So there's like an on your face.
What's an incel? What?
Yeah, so what's an incel, Isabelle?
Okay, so okay. Well, basically an incel is mostly a group that's online, and it stands for involuntarily celibate. And it is a group of like,
those people. I didn't know they had their own like terminology.
Oh yeah, they do. And they're like extremely woman hating, and that rhetoric is so scary to me, because it takes zero responsibility for your own actions, your own thoughts, and it puts like everything on women. And it's like, well, I would have been married in the 1950s because women were happier to be stay-at-home wives, and I would have led my family X, Y, and Z and all these things. And so to me, that's like a huge fear of like, what could we do differently? I think like there needs to be a talk when it comes to men and women in younger generations. And that's like one of the reasons why when I do teach about feminism, I don't just want to talk to the women in the class. Like, I want to make sure that like everyone truly feels included and everyone understands how these structures are harming everyone. And I even talk to my students about incels, and I like talk to my students about like online worlds and the places that they will find. And I even like open up the conversation of like why it's so dangerous to have this type of rhetoric, and ultimately how like you're not going to truly find happiness or love or a partner if you're constantly blaming people for not wanting to be with you as like a fault of theirs, rather than like looking at yourself. And so that to me is like one part that I don't really have an answer, but it seems like something happened from like the millennial to Gen Z men, where like millennial men were like kind of on the wagon a little bit more.
Yes.
Something has happened with Gen Z men where they're just like feeling really alienated. And again, that's scary, because like when men feel like women are the problem, that's a dangerous world for young women to find themselves in. I also think, you know, kind of in that same vein, that domestic violence is still an issue and one that I think doesn't get talked enough about. I also think that just like we saw issues in the first and the second wave feminist movement, that not all voices are heard in the current feminist movement. I think there should be more trans voices, there should be more non-binary voices. And even if that muddies the waters a little bit, it doesn't mean that that's a problem. I think, again, it comes back to like people need to understand that people are complex and therefore movements are complex. But we don't need to like dumbify or oversimplify the movement. Like we're smart, capable people that can understand like two things may be true at once, you know? And so those are kind of some of the things that stand out to me when I look at like the modern world and the modern challenges. And also to your point, when I talk about the second wave, even when I talk about the first wave, there are challenges, especially when it comes to societal expectations, that people go, like, this could be yesterday, you know, this could be me today. This has not changed when it comes to how women feel and the responsibilities that women have. And, you know, I recently had a daughter, like a year and a half ago, and I truly was shocked at how anybody could think motherhood would like weaken someone. You know? Like I was just like, oh man, like this is so hard. And my husband told me multiple times as I was like struggling with feeding, struggling with sleeping, he was like, well, if I was in control of breastfeeding, I would have given up a long time ago. And I was like, yeah, you would have. Like, you know, and I genuinely, like I was telling my friends, I was like, I almost want to put it on a resume. Like, what did you do? Like, well, I had a baby. That should tell you a lot. Like, and not that everybody needs a baby, but like, it was more of just like, I had no clue how hard it was. Like, no clue how hard it was. And that part really shocked me. That it was once I had a baby, a lot of the moms in my life were like, yeah, it's so hard, right? Like, yeah, don't, you know, come in, like, let me tell you more. And I was just like, what is happening? Like, this is insane, people.
Wow.
Yeah, we've both chosen not to have children because of that. Yeah. Like, I don't want to speak for you too, Auria, but we both don't want lives of moms. We don't want to be like moms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we actually talk about this a lot, Isabelle. It's like because of the societal expectation for women to be moms, no one will talk about the difficulties. Everyone's just like, you got it, you're a woman, it'll come naturally, don't worry about anything, your body knows what it's doing. It's like, that's not true.
I think about that Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote. The pedestal you put me on is actually a cage. And I freaking hate it when people talk about like her maternal instinct. Oh, so-and-so so good with the baby. I'm like, so-and-so has been at home with the baby for 24 hours a day for the last 3 months. No wonder she's better with the baby than dad. Like, it's pure time. It's not some magical thing that's happening. Like, that like mindset, and I've heard it from my friends. Like, I've even heard it from my male friends who have partners that have children, of like, oh, so-and-so makes the best. She's done so much research. She's so good with her. It drives me nuts because I'm like, you're saying compliments, and I love those compliments, and that's amazing. But you are also saying those compliments as an excuse for why you don't have to participate. Oh, mom can put her to sleep way better than I can. Well, mom has had 2 times more practice than you. That's the difference, you know? Yes. And breastfeeding and your boobs do definitely help. Like, I'm not trying to say there's like no difference at all, but I was an exclusive pumper because like breastfeeding did not come easy whatsoever. And so, and I still got my baby down. Like, it wasn't like I was like, oh, and now that I can't actually breastfeed, everyone's never going to sleep again. You know, like you figure it out, right? You figure out what it's going to take, and it takes practice. But the key is practice. And so anytime people like paint mothers as this like magical, you're just like a superhero that has this like amazing gift, I just think it oversimplifies it, and it takes away the effort. Like, no, this lady is trying her freaking hardest, and she hasn't slept, and she still shows up. That's what you should be thanking her for. Not that she somehow knows how. That, you know, it takes away the effort she's putting into it. So I have a lot of feelings about that.
Yes. Yeah, I have a lot of friends that are they think very similarly, but on the men's side of things, because they have to ask their husbands to do things, and then the husband doesn't do it nearly as well. So they're like, fine, I'll do it. And then after years of that, the husband doesn't participate in dad things at all, because they're like, you got it. And then she's also like, I got it. But it's only because she's had months of practice while he's been able to say, you're better than this. And she's able to say, I'm better than you. Yeah. And it's just like, it's a horrible cycle.
Yeah, I know. I hate it. I absolutely hate that. And I think it minimizes the work, and I think it gives an excuse to men. And so to me, it's like the worst of both cases.
Yeah.
But yeah, being a mom is so hard, and therefore I'm also very much in support of like women that don't choose this life, because it is all consuming, and one that is like so much harder than the world makes it out to be. And to Betty Friedan's point, one that nobody really wanted to talk about. And even to this day, I sometimes feel like I do stop myself sometimes when I say, like, I was excited to go back to work, you know, like on maternity leave, I was like, let's go, I'm going crazy, like I need to go, I need some independence, I need to leave. And then I remember having friends who had children really quickly after me, who then were like devastated that their maternity leave was ending, and I was like, oh, what's wrong with me? Oh like, should I have been more sad? Should I have been more excited? And, you know, they might be thinking the same thing. Should I be more excited to go back to work? Should I, you know, again, it's this like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So, again, coming back to that choice of like why feminism is so important to me is because you should just like empower a women's choice. And anybody that like second guesses that is not living the best version of being a feminist. And that also means learning along the way. I've definitely, like I said, I used to laugh at that meme when I was in college. Even though in college I totally would have called myself a feminist. And now looking back, I'm like, I shouldn't have even thought it was funny. I should have like immediately rolled my eyes. But 20-year-old Isabelle was just like, oh, so silly. But yeah.
Yes, totally. Yeah. And I think as women age, they also see the equality firsthand. And in college, there's inequalities, but it's kind of like pertaining to hookups and sex.
Yeah.
But when everyone's in the working fields, that's a different set of inequalities that you're privy to that you weren't, you know, in college.
Yeah.
Right? At least that's how I see it. I think as women age and as men age, it's different inequalities. Like, I get very upset about how women can't physically age, but men can. Like, like it just
you're allowed a dad bod, but you're not allowed a mom bod.
Yeah. Exactly. Or like very anti-wrinkle for women, but men have been wrinkly and it's fine. So it's just stuff like that. It's like,
and they look rugged, and they age.
Yes. And they do look rugged. Like, yeah. Brad Pitt's like, what, 65? He's gorgeous. Like, it's just not, it's not fair. But it happens like as you move through life.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, I think to your point, 100%, I agree. I think when you're young, you're not sharing equitable tasks, right? You're like going on dates, you're hanging out. To be fair, if sex isn't equitable, then that's maybe a red flag. Like, maybe that's the first step you take of being maybe this should be better.
Yes, seriously. And we need to talk about that more, just societally overall, period.
Yeah.
But it's also like, first of all, thank you for everything. But I do want you to just end this podcast with what advice you would give people who want to participate in equality on a daily basis.
Yeah. I mean, my first piece of advice would be to call yourself a feminist. Challenge the fear that word has. Challenge the negative connotation that it has. And that is like ultimately what I strive to do around my students is, you know, I make it clear that like I'm a feminist and here are the reasons why, and here's what that means to me. And I'm also married, and I also have a baby, and I'm also a teacher. Like I fall into so many of the stereotypical women's roles. And I also make dinner, you know, like I take on those, and I explain that like but these are all my choices. These are the things that I'm doing because they bring me joy. These are the things that I chose. Nobody has forced me into X, Y, and Z. And I also chose to marry a man that calls himself a feminist, and what that means for him, and what that means now that we're raising a daughter. So I think that that's like the first thing is like, don't be afraid of the word. Don't feel it. And if people are shocked by it, I think you can take it one of two ways. Either you can be like, okay, good day. We clearly are not going to have anything in common. Goodbye. Or you can, you know, enlighten them a little bit. You don't have to be as big of a history nerd as I am when it comes to that. But I like to tell people that the reason why they don't like the word feminist is because of a PR stunt in that second feminist wave. Of like people who are so afraid of gender equality that they tried to taint the word, and people are falling for it. So like, stop falling for the PR stunt, push back, you know? The other thing is to just, and this is hard sometimes for women, is to like actually voice your opinions and your concerns. For so long in American history, women have been told to like quiet and stay in their place and stay at home and stay in these roles and just be submissive. And so don't be submissive. Don't be afraid to be called a bitch. Don't be afraid to be seen as bossy. Don't be afraid to say you want to have a job where you make millions, you know, like voice all of your opinions, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because ultimately they're all valid. And then the last one that I would say to my like somewhat like cis women is to find men that are on the same page as you. Like, don't minimize yourself to fit in that like patriarchy world, and don't feel like you need to quiet yourself to be with a specific type of partner if you're attracted to men. Because that's just, it's going to end up being a really hard relationship if you find yourself having to quiet your voice every step of the way. So those are my like micro feminist movements that I try and engage in on the daily. And, you know, my first year of teaching, when I was so excited to teach about the feminist movement, and I really had this goal. I like, you know, started the class like, are you a feminist? And then I'd like circle back at the end of the lessons and be like, are you a feminist? And I was hoping, you know, I'd get like 100% at the end. It would be like, yes, I'm a feminist. And that first year when it didn't happen, I remember being so sad, like unable to fall asleep. I was like, what did I do wrong? Like, I explained it. I explained that it's just gender equality. Like, how are you not in support of gender equality? Like, I don't understand. What am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? And I've now kind of realized that it's just step one. You don't have to be a feminist by the time you leave my class and you're a 16-year-old. Like, that's okay. But my hope is that, like, I've cracked the door open enough that the next time you see somebody on TikTok who's like, yeah, you know, these like girls that don't shave their armpits and, you know, don't want to be married and say they want to be childless, they'll be like, oh, like, but Miss C says she's a feminist and she told me that she shaves her armpits. She told the whole class she shaves her armpits. Like, you know, or, you know, she said that she, you know, for most of her life didn't want kids or X, Y, and Z. And like, enough for them to stop and second guess, so that by the time that their like frontal lobes have formed enough, whether it's boys or girls, that they're able to go like, yeah, my teenage self couldn't see past it, but maybe my adult self is. And the side that's like looking for a partner, and the side that's eventually going to vote, because hopefully I've also taught you to vote, then, you know, maybe then you'll make those choices and think about gender equality and how this might impact boys and girls. And this notion of protection, is it truly protection? It's nice to give people a schema to be able to like actually like put some of these weird, vague feelings or views of society onto like, oh, that's actually a structure that's been put in place. Or, oh, the way that I'm feeling is actually not weird. It's supported by years and years and years of our history. And sometimes that's a little disheartening, but also sometimes when you see it through the side of history that pushes for change and inclusivity, you're like, okay, I'm on this right path. I'm continuing the fight that Betty Friedan started in the 1950s, or Shirley Chisholm started, you know, like all these other women that you could be like, oh, like I'm not alone. I'm continuing this.
Yes. Amazing.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me on. It was so much fun. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and we're both millennials too, so you're in good company.
I love it.
Thank you so much, Isabelle.
Thank you for joining us on UpLift Women's Wellness. We're so grateful to have you as part of our community. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Follow us on social media for updates and extra inspiration between episodes. And remember, you're stronger, braver, and more capable than you know. Until next time, stay strong, stay empowered, and keep uplifting each other.